Hello everyone, and welcome to today's virtual conference titled China, the Renminbi, and the IMF's Special Drawing Rights. My name is Emily Slater, and I am the Deputy Director here at the Bretton Woods Committee. I would like to thank our esteemed speakers for joining us today, as well as our global audience in attendance, especially all of our Bretton Woods Committee members and leadership. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the Attendee Interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right-hand corner. The orange arrow icon pictured here allows you to collapse and expand the control panel. By default, you have joined the presentation's audio using your computer's speaker system or voice over IP. If you would prefer to join over the telephone, just select Telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. Please note that if you join via telephone only, you will not have the ability to pose questions during the Q&A portion. Currently, all participants are in listen-only mode as indicated by the muted icon in the middle of your control panel. During the Q&A portion of the presentation, we will unmute individual lines so participants can pose questions to the speakers. You will also need to ensure that you unmute your microphone from your end as well. The microphone icon on your control panel will turn green when your microphone is enabled. If you have a question, please type your question into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the virtual conference. We will collect these and call on individuals during the Q&A session at the end of the discussion. You may also use the raise your hand function to gain our attention throughout the presentation. Finally, you may view today's virtual conference in full screen mode by clicking the blue square on the control panel. You can click it again to return to the original viewing preferences. I would now like to turn it over to Mr. Randy Rogers, our Executive Director here at the Bretton Woods Committee, who will be facilitating this discussion and will introduce our distinguished speakers. Randy, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Emily, and thank you all. Welcome to everyone joining us around the globe, especially Bretton Woods Committee members in attendance. We have also two speakers with us today, although you should see three, but we have technical difficulties with Dr. Yu Yongming, but he is on the phone with us and joining us today, as well as Dr. Warren Coates, whom you see here, and we're very grateful both of you could join us. The topic today, as you're all aware, in November 2015, the IMF conducted its 5-year review of global currencies, included in its special drawing rights, or SDR, reserve currency basket, and voted to include the Chinese renminbi, otherwise known as the yuan, which I'll refer to it as it's easier for me to pronounce. And that goes into effect later this year. Since then, I think it's fair that the yuan has been fluctuating wildly in currency markets, and for most people, figuring out China's currency policy has not been easy. Hence the topics for today's discussion. What is the significance of the IMF's decision? And what are the short-term and long-term implications for China, for the IMF, for the SDR itself, and perhaps the future of global currencies? Is this SDR inclusion a largely symbolic gesture toward China's status and credibility on the world stage, or are there more expectations behind this? And also for the People's Bank of China, or the PBOC, which is undertaking a balancing act of market intervention to manage the volatility surrounding the yuan. Is this perhaps a stepping stone down a path of change with China's currency exchange regime? And what implications might we see there? We have two unique perspectives, both members of the Bretton Woods Committee, to provide insights into these topics today. Perhaps one with a good pulse on the IMF and another with a pulse on China. First, Dr. Yu Yongming is currently an academic at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, or CAS, with expertise in macroeconomics, international finance, and politics, world economics. He was formerly director of the Institute of World Economics and Politics at CAS, president of the China Society of World Economics. He served on the Monetary Policy Committee of the PBOC and also served as a member of the Advisory Committee of National Planning of the Commission of National Development and Reform for the People's Republic of China. He has degrees from Cass and from the University of Oxford and has co-authored several books and publications in various journals. He sits on several advisory capacities and organizations and think tanks, including the UN Commission of the Reform of the International Financial and Monetary System, the UN Committee of Development Policy, Brookings Institution, and of course the Bretton Woods Committee. We also have Dr. Warren Coates, who's an economist specializing in monetary policy, as well as an advisor to central banks on the development of their capacity to formulate and implement monetary policy. Dr. Coates held a long career at the IMF, where as Assistant Director of the Monetary and Financial Systems Department, he led missions to over 20 countries. He was formerly Chief of the SDR Division in the Finance Department and has written a book and over a dozen articles about SDR. Following his retirement, he's continued to provide technical advice to banks, working with several consultancy partners and multilateral partners. He's also formerly director of the Cayman Island Monetary Authority and an economics professor at the University of Virginia. He holds degrees from UC Berkeley and from the University of Chicago. Dr. Coates, welcome. Just a quick note about the format for today. Dr. Yu will open it up with remarks, about 15 minutes of remarks, followed by insights from Dr. Coates. I may pose a quick question to our speakers, and then I will open it up to the audience for Q&A. So with that, welcome again, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Yu.
Hello, good morning. It's a great honor to be here to speak with you. Unfortunately, I just cannot get through with this platform, so I have to talk on the phone. And I have got some questions about the significance of China's RMB's joint SDR. Of course, China's RMB's enter into SDR is warmly welcomed by China's monetary authority and the public in general. But personally, I don't think RMB's joining SDR will have a very important short-run impact on China's monetary policy, China's economic development. I would rather say that this is more symbolic. This is recognition of China's achievement over the past 2 decades. In this regard, it's important for China to be able to join SDR. I think the most important objective for the People's Bank of China over the past few years in trying to put RMB into the basket is to use this entry as sort of an incentive to promote economic reform, to promote capital account liberalization in particular. Perhaps People's Bank of China also want to use this opportunity to make RMB more flexible. But anyway, at this moment, China is facing huge challenge, both in terms of macroeconomic stability and also rebalancing, so on and so forth. I don't think RMB's entry into SDR will really have an immense impact on all those efforts. And I think I should utilize this opportunity to say something about China's exchange rate policy. At this moment, I think this is a very important issue for not only China, but also for the rest of the world. For more than 10 years, RMB has been under the pressure of appreciation. Since 2005, RMB depegged with the US dollar. I think China at the time should allow RMB to appreciate in a faster pace. I think the process is too slow. We adopt sort of a gradual appreciation approach. This caused lots of problems. But anyway, this situation started to change since early 2014. In early 2014, People's Bank of China noticed that because RMB appreciation expectations, carry trade was rampant. Huge amount hot money flow into China. And so People's Bank of China want to stop this. And the most important way of doing this is to artificially to make RMB devalue by buying dollars and so on and so forth. People's Bank of China was successful in creating devaluation RMB, though this is against market force, because at the time, China is still running twin surpluses, current account surplus and capital account surplus. RMB should appreciate, but People's Bank's intervention made RMB devalue. This action punished those speculators. They bet on RMB appreciation. So technically, tactically, this move of People's Bank of China was successful. But since then, and also because change in China's economic fundamentals, RMB appreciation expectations were weakened significantly, and RMB devaluation expectations were creeping into the market. This happened in early 2014. But after punishing those speculators, and People's Bank of China returned to normal course. So RMB stopped devaluation. Instead, RMB start to appreciate again. This maintained for a few quarters. But since 2014, China started to run capital account deficit. This is something very unusual, because over the past 3 decades, China ran both capital account and current account surplus at the same time. But starting from the second quarter of 2014, due to changes in economic fundamentals, China started to run capital account deficit. But still, because China's current account surplus is bigger, so China is still running in the national balance payment surplus. But this situation changed gradually. In the first quarter of 2015, China's capital account deficit became larger than China's current account surplus. So a pressure on RMB devaluation has been created. So on the one hand, I should say that economic fundamentals put pressure, down pressure on RMB. On the other hand, because change expectations, capital flight started to flow, become quite prevalent. People, for example, more and more Chinese, because they expect that the RMB will fall, so they sell RMB and hold more dollar deposits. And also Chinese corporates, previously they borrow a lot from international capital market. They repay their foreign dollar-denominated debt earlier. And also people who did a lot of carry trade started to unwind. So basically, because change of fundamentals, and also because RMB devaluation expectations, so China's capital outflow become larger and larger. So this creates a very large pressure on RMB devaluation. And so People's Bank of China actually is facing a choice to allow RMB to fall in line with the market demand and supply, or try to maintain RMB exchange rate stability. I think basically People's Bank of China prefer to have a more stable exchange rate. But in August 11, I think because they want to use the opportunity to make RMB more flexible, make RMB exchange rate, I mean the official exchange rate, the central parity rate, more in line with the market demand and supply and demand and supply. So they allow RMB to devalue by 1.9%. This is very important because for the first time for many years, and the market realized that People's Bank of China will allow RMB to devalue. So there was a panic in the market. Capital outflows become very large in a short period of time. So I think People's Bank of China more or less panic. They failed to predict this will happen. So they think enough. So they try to stop this outflow. So they virtually shift to a calling peg to US dollar to stabilize the exchange rate. So from I think 13th of October until from 13th of August until November, RMB basically was quite stable. But because large capital outflow, if you want to stabilize RMB exchange rate, you have to intervene in a very big way. So very quickly, People's Bank of China used huge amount of foreign exchange reserves. Actually, in 2015, China used more than $500 billion foreign exchange reserves to pump up exchange rate. So this cost is very high. So I think starting from November, People's Bank of China changed its strategy a little bit. They allow RMB to devalue slowly without market notice. But of course, it's impossible because market notice this change of attitude. There's fear of further RMB devaluation. So people started to dump RMB assets to buy dollar assets. So it caused problem early this year. Then People's Bank of China decided to intervene again to stop this panic. I think yesterday, starting from yesterday, the market is calmed down because People's Bank of China sent a very strong signal. We want to have a stable exchange rate. Because People's Bank of China has huge foreign exchange reserves, so far the market still believe if People's Bank of China want to keep RMB stable, then it will be able to do so. But our worry is that this kind of calling peg will not be able to stabilize exchange rate because it used too much foreign exchange reserves. So if you want to maintain RMB stability, then you have to use foreign exchange reserves and in a very quick way. So if this year China's economic fundamentals fail to change greatly, then there will be still be RMB devaluation expectations. There still be capital outflows. Then you have to still use foreign exchange reserves to defend RMB. Last year we used $500 billion. This year, how much we use? So if you are exhausting your foreign exchange reserves, so your defense of RMB you become less convincing, and there will be more attack. So this is really a very big problem. So now in China there are different views. Some people argue that we should allow RMB to flow and stop intervention, to let RMB to fall to whatever levels. And they also think that because China's economic fundamentals are still fine, because China is still running larger current surplus, so they don't believe that RMB will devalue by a very big way, say 20%. And even if RMB will devalue by 20%, so what? Chinese corporates' foreign debt is not very big. Chinese banks' currency mismatch is not very serious. And also now in China there isn't the inflation. We have a deflation. So this group of people argue that we should not fear too much about this devaluation. But many people argue that because market is difficult to predict, this kind of large devaluation may cause panic, then it will cause something unpredictable. So we should still try to keep RMB more or less stable. So then come another policy suggestions, that is to peg to basket currencies. And then there are different versions of pegging to basket currencies. One is a Singaporean type of pegging to basket currencies. But some Chinese economists argue that, yes, we are going to peg basket currencies, but we should allow this band much wider. For example, we should allow this band as wide as 7.5% or even 15%. So this is a peg, but with a very wide band. Some other argue that, yes, we should have a central rate. We should have a very wide band, but we'll keep this band unannounced so that you make a market to guess, so that it becomes very difficult for speculators to launch a concerted attack on RMB. And if necessary, then People's Bank of China will use all his ammunition to defend this final line, and instead to fight sort of a skirmish. And while you're fighting a small war, then you retreat, then you find another war, then you retreat. Then during this process, you use all your ammunition. That will be disastrous. So at this moment, there are lots of debates about the right exchange rate regimes which China should adopt. But so far, I think People's Bank of China is prefer to use a Singaporean style of peg to basket currencies. I think this is the kind of situation. My biggest worry is that this year China's economic fundamentals would not be able to improve significantly, and then market expectations for RMB would not be very big. So there will be another wave attack. And so if you really, if you don't allow RMB to devalue in a quite large way, then situation could be difficult, because we need monetary policy independence, because China needs to introduce certain stimulus packages. China should use more expansionary fiscal policy. In order to support this fiscal policy, we need more expansionary monetary policy. And taking international situation into consideration, capital outflow will be large. Then if you do not allow RMB to be more flexible, then you will lose monetary policy autonomy. This is a very big problem. And also, it's not affordable for China to use a huge amount of foreign exchange reserves in a very wasteful way. And this is also very large cost for China. So my solution, my preferred solution is either allow RMB to be freely floating, or you use sort of a or you use you peg to basket currencies, but with a very wide band, even unannounced band. Perhaps we can have some time, I mean, to maintain RMB exchange rate stability to a certain extent, not exactly. I mean, to avoid very big devaluation, but we allow some devaluation. So at the same time, we use expansion monetary policy, fiscal policy to stimulate economy, to improve economic fundamentals. So if we have a right policy mix, then China will be able to overcome the kind of difficulty and to maintain economic growth. And on the whole, I think China's economic future should be fine, but right policy mix is very important. So in regard with the China's enter into SDR, I think the positive impact is great, because if RMB, if we want RMB to play an important role in this basket, RMB should be, should not be pegged to US dollar. The exchange rate policy should be very flexible. And if you peg to US dollar, then the enter into SDR basket is not very meaningful for RMB. But on the other hand, how about the capital account liberalization? I think this is the problem. And over the past few years, I think the pace of capital account liberalization is too fast because China is not ready yet. Over the past few years, in the name of RMB internationalization, People's Bank of China has pushed capital account liberalization in a very forceful way, but because we are not ready, so this liberalization has created problems. So after entering into SDR basket, I don't think China should reimpose capital control, because China has not fully opened its capital account yet. So People's Bank of China should implement the remaining measures of capital control strictly, without adding new rules and so on. So in this way, I think China's monetary policy, exchange rate policy, will be in line with the requirement of SDR basket. Two very important standards, freely usable, and also this important role in international trade and finance transaction. Especially for this standard of freely usable. I think China should try its best to satisfy this requirement. But fortunately, freely usable does not mean China has to fully open its capital account. I think at this stage, perhaps People's Bank of China has to tighten its control over short-term cross-border capital flows. And with a certain control and also with a more flexible exchange rate policy, I think China will be able to overcome the difficulties now we are facing. I think I should end here, then I would be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yu. That was very comprehensive and raised a lot of questions that are on folks' minds today. I'll pass it right now to Dr. Coates, who will give us a little bit more perspective on the SDR and the IMF. Dr. Coates?
Randy and Dr. Yu, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to participate in this conversation. I agree with virtually everything that Dr. Yu said, and would like perhaps to give a slightly different emphasis on a couple of elements. Near the end, he stressed what I very much agree with, that the inclusion of the renminbi in the SDR valuation basket is more important politically than it is economically, meaning that it was a driver of a lot of the financial and economic reforms, primarily financial reforms, that China undertook in order to qualify as a freely usable currency. So it played a very important role in that regard. It is not, does not have any material significance for the valuation and attractiveness of the SDR itself, and its impact on the use of the renminbi internationally, the internationalization of the renminbi, is, as Dr. Yu said, mainly a consequence of the liberalizing steps that China has taken in the use of the renminbi, both onshore and offshore, and some liberalizations in its own domestic financial market, which provide the basis for the SDR interest rate the renminbi component of that, and the ability of those using SDRs, the official users of SDRs, to acquire and deal in Chinese assets onshore. Let me step back. I doubt that there's anyone listening in who doesn't really know the history of the SDR or what it isn't supposed to be doing, but let me just spend a few minutes to quickly review that. The SDR was created in 1969 to augment international reserve assets, meaning really to augment the dollar in international reserves. And this is perhaps a good moment to recall that along with the highly touted privileges for the dollar of its use internationally in being able to borrow in its own currency and so on, there are some significant costs that accompany the use of the dollar abroad. It means that in order to supply the dollars that other countries wish to hold in their reserves, the U.S. had to run a balance of payments deficit sufficient to meet that demand. To do so really contributed, if not drove, the exporting or the offshoring of a lot of U.S. manufacturing. So what many people complain about in the U.S. about a loss of manufacturing to the rest of the world is a direct consequence of the rest of the world's use of the dollar and its reserves. So there's a strong case, and the governor of the People's Bank of China made this case a few years back for replacing national currencies as reserve currencies with a truly international one. So that's the role that the SDR was initially expected or meant to play. At the time of its creation, its value was fixed 1-to-1 to the US dollar, whose value was fixed at that time directly to, I think it was 1/35 of an ounce of gold. So the valuation of the SDR was fixed to gold prices. When Nixon closed the gold window in 71 through 74, it was a process. The currency basket methodology for establishing the SDR's value was created. I think there were initially 16 currencies in the basket. When I was chief of the operations division for SDRs, there were 5. And with the addition of the renminbi, there are now 5 again. To qualify to be included, as Dr. Yu noted, there were 2 main criteria: that the exports from China were large relative to other currencies, and they are the 3rd largest. In fact, they qualified by that criteria 5 years ago, but they did not qualify 5 years ago by the 2nd criteria, which is freely usable. So the discussion this time around was really focused on whether the renminbi is now a freely usable currency, or a sufficiently freely usable currency. And the one way of stressing the significance of that is that when the IMF Lens, we say when a member purchases a currency under an IMF program, the currencies that are actually lent are often not needed or wanted by the borrowing country. They wish to convert them into dollars or euros, and a non-freely usable currency that is lent through an IMF program is converted by the central bank of the issuing currency at their representative rate. When a country's currency reaches the status of freely usable, the mechanism changes. The central bank of the issuing currency no longer has an obligation to convert it at a representative rate because the judgment that the currency is freely usable means that that can be done in foreign exchange markets without serious disruption and with ease. So China now has moved into that status. Any country, Greece, for example, that may receive renminbi in a purchase will now have to convert them into, they presumably want euros, into euros in the foreign exchange market. And the judgment is that the renminbi is sufficiently freely tradable that's easily done. The other important purpose and role that was set out for the SDR in the beginning of not replacing, but supplementing the dollar and now the euro to some extent in the expansion of the supply of international reserves was not fulfilled in any meaningful sense. The SDR is used in IMF operations. It's the unit of account for all IMF operations. Loans from the IMF are denominated in SDRs and so on. But it has not played a significant role at all as a supplement to international reserves. There are several reasons for that, and there are several things that the IMF can do that would importantly promote the development of its use as an international reserve asset. The first, the simplest, under existing provisions of the articles, and I want to add here because I don't want to forget to make the point, that along with the political symbolic importance of adding the renminbi to the SDR basket, the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government's final belated endorsement of the amendments to the IMF's Articles of Agreement, which among other things increases China's quota in the fund and hence its voting strength in the fund, and does a number of other important things that keeps the IMF more globally representative. I think all of those are of critical importance in encouraging China, especially, to remain within the existing Bretton Woods international financial system. And China has been going off in its own direction with the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, the BRICS Development Bank, and that's most undesirable from the point of view of the global trading system under an agreed set of rules of the game. So these measures, approving the amendments to the fund's articles and including the renminbi in the SDR, are very important, in my view, for that purpose. So why has the SDR failed to supplement reserves, and what can be done? First, if there's no political will, of course, it will never happen. Members are obligated under the articles to make the SDR the principal reserve asset, and of course that's been totally ignored. So without the will, nothing happens. But if there is the will, and as I said, the governor of the People's Bank of China a few years back took a strong position in this regard and in this direction. If there is will, it is not a difficult matter for the IMF to catalyze various markets around the world to invoice their global trade in SDRs. If the world price of oil were in SDRs, of copper, aluminum, and other globally traded things were in SDRs, this would importantly increase the need for traders and central banks to hold more SDRs in order to facilitate the settlement of transactions in globally traded commodities priced in SDRs. So this is a relatively simple measure, easily undertaken under existing provisions of the articles, which would have a very important effect. But the biggest impediment to the role of the SDR arises from the way in which they are created, the so-called allocation mechanism. When the membership vote to have an additional creation of SDRs, a so-called allocation, they are sprinkled around the fund's membership in relation to member quotas in the IMF. There's a very ingenious, complex system that governs the use of them, given the fact that this method of creation can't possibly meet the demand directly, so there are administrative rules on how and when SDRs can be used, and so on. These really, while ingenious, stifle any serious development and growth of SDRs in global financial markets. What I have long proposed is that the creation of SDRs replace the allocation mechanism and all of its administrative controls and complexities with issuing them under currency board rules. This means that any central bank or anyone who wishes to have more SDRs buys them at the current market value of the SDR. This is how a currency board works, and they pay for them with one of the currencies in the basket. The underlying requirements of such a scheme are spelled out in papers that I have written, but this would transform the role of the SDR in one clean sweep through something like it basically is the substitution account that was discussed in the 70s. Virtually all existing reserves held by central banks and denominated in dollars largely and euros, I mean that's the majority of the reserves, could be swapped, substituted for SDRs, giving the dollar and euro, etc. assets to the issuer of these SDRs, presumably the IMF, as the asset backing for the SDRs that are thereby created and put on the books of the People's Bank of China and so on. So overnight, the SDR could become the overwhelmingly dominant reserve asset in the world, and with a currency board issue and redeeming mechanism to control the supply so that the supply is market determined and always matches the market's demand. I think the SDR system could be transformed and fulfill the objective that it was created for. I wanted to slip in one thing I meant to say at the beginning about Dr. Yu's comments. The capital flows now out of China are simply a reversal of artificial capital inflows that occurred in the previous decade. So I am not worried at all about a rebalancing that simply pulls back out what shouldn't have been in there in the first place. But with that, let me see what sort of questions there was.
Thank you, Dr. Coates, and I know you've put a lot of thought into that proposal, and I hope we get an audience question or two around that. I do want to remind the audience that questions can be had here. We have about 15 minutes left. I'd like to ask one question and ask Dr. Yu to start, and both of you are welcome to respond and try and keep your comments brief so we can get a question or two in from the audience. But I want to go back to China's currency exchange regime and ask how can the People's Bank of China establish more credibility in this tumultuous period as China is undergoing financial and economic reform, maybe particularly as it relates to some suggestions for transparency of data disclosure, which could then, promote a more freely usable currency in that regard. Dr. Yu?
Yes, and I think that is very important. By the way, I think I should say a few words about Mr. Koh's comment. As a former member of Stiglitz Commission, I fully endorse Mr. Koh's comments. I think whether SDR can be used of international reserve currency is really a political issue. If there's political view, then I think it's feasible for the international monetary system to use SDR and to promote SDR as international reserve currency. Okay. Then about China, I think at this moment the most important thing is really not transparency with regard to People's Bank China's exchange rate policy. I think the system should be transparent. What sort of exchange rate system should be very transparent. And for example, but the technical details are not necessarily transparent. For example, a Singaporean PEC. The system is very clear, but you don't know what is the band. You don't know what is the central parity rate and so on and so forth. So I think People's Bank China at this stage should think through what sort of exchange rate regime you are going to adopt. I mean, in 2005, People's Bank China said that China's exchange rate regime is pegged to basket currencies. But actually, that was not the case. And they would take lots of other things into consideration. So this is really confusing. If you said our exchange rate system is not pegged to a basket, you say so. But you shouldn't, while you are saying this is pegged to basket, but in practice, it's not pegged to a basket. I think that's a problem. But if you say, in order to make RMB flexible enough, at the same time we want to avoid huge volatility, then we need to adopt a sort of exchange rate regime, say a sort of pegged to a basket, but will not announce the band. This, in a sense, is not transparent. But it's also transparent because we told you that this band is not announced. We will not tell you what will be the band. I think that will be okay. So the key thing at this moment for the People's Bank China is to think through, to make decision, what should be the what should be the exchange rate regime you are going to adopt. But so far we haven't heard any formal statement by senior officials from People's Bank China. I think this is a problem.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Koh, do you have a response to?
Yes, I completely agree with Dr. Yu. I'm on transparency with regard to the band or operational details. I'm agnostic, but I think transparency with regard to data is very important and would be very helpful. China does not yet, although they're committed to provide more information, they do not yet provide data on the composition of their foreign exchange reserves. After they have taken measures, there should be transparency about what it was they have done.
May I say a few words about this? And the fact is that it's more transparent to you than to us. We knew even less information about everything. At least you can read some materials from other central banks. I entirely agree with you. We should have more transparent data so that people can make judgment, not only people abroad, but also people within China.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah. Let me open it up to audience questions here because we do have a few questions on the line. Emily, can you open it up?
Sure. We do have a few questions. I'd first like to call on Christian Kopf. I have unmuted your line, Mr. Kopf. If you would like to answer or pose your question, you may do so now.
Yes, thank you very much. This is Christian Kopf at Pinnacle Capital in London. I would have a question on the appropriate level of reserves in China. Dr. Yu, you mentioned that you would feel uncomfortable with a big loss in reserves. But actually, if the PBOC intervenes in the currency market to counter currency movements that are caused by private sector capital outflow, the only thing it actually does is facilitate a change in the composition of China's net international investment position, away from low-yielding international reserves that are currently held by the State Administration of Foreign Exchange, and potentially towards high-yielding international assets, or outbound FDI or private sector assets held by China's private sector. Now, if you get that change in the composition of the international investment position, it would likely improve China's income balance, away from low-yielding foreign assets towards higher-yielding foreign assets, and that may be overall beneficial to the country. So what would be the problem in allowing the PBOC to lose, say, 1 trillion in reserves to allow that change in the composition of the net international investment position?
Okay. When RMB is stable, when RMB is in the process for appreciation, I would be very happy to see People's Bank of China is losing foreign exchange reserves, because this is because ordinary Chinese corporates will hold more RMB assets rather than dollar assets, right? When RMB is in process of appreciation. Now the situation is just opposite, because this is a devaluation. So people are dumping RMB assets. This is like sort of dollarization. It's not good for the economy, and also it means huge welfare losses. This is misallocation resources, and so I don't want to see it. If really, actually, a few years ago, I proposed that Ministry of Finance should issue bonds to raise money to buy foreign exchange reserves from People's Bank of China, so that Ministry of Finance can put dollars in better use. And also, for example, we should have more foreign wealth fund and so on and so forth. These are right thing to do. But to use dollar to intervene in foreign exchange market to stop falling exchange rate of RMB is a waste of money. This is my view.
Emily, is there a question for Dr. Coates or the SGR we can have posed?
We do have a question from Mr. Larry White. He is unable to he doesn't have access to a mic, so I will pose it for him. His question is a digital global reserve currency feasible in the future? A digital bancor, if you will.
Dr. Coates, want to take that one?
Virtually all, 99.9% of all international transactions are digital. I think, so I'm assuming that Larry is talking about not the digital currencies, which we have, but non-legal tender, privately created digital currencies like Bitcoin and so on. And
blockchain, right?
While I am a strong supporter of allowing such experiments to go forward, I have never had much faith or confidence that, given the very nature of money, that they would ever play a very serious role.
All right, and I think we do have time for maybe one last question. So we have a question from a Ms. Dana Marshall. Ms. Marshall, I have unmuted your line. If you have access to a mic, can you go ahead and pose your question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's the question was there are major forces at play in China that would sort of lead them to want to more devalue the yuan, more in terms of export promotion for promoting manufacturing industry, and forces that would seek to want to appreciate the currency, the China going out investment strategy to support overseas education costs and that sort of thing. Which of these forces do you think might be stronger now and in the near future, and how does the system sort of decide in which direction to go? Thank you.
I think at this moment, trade is not important consideration when people in China are discussing this exchange rate issue, because China's trade is not very sensitive to change in exchange rate, because China's exports are fully, or at least to a very large degree, incorporate into global value chains. So nobody knows very clearly whether certain degree of devaluation will have a positive impact on China's export. People are not very clear, but of course it will help. It at least is helpful for China's export sectors. But so far at this moment, China's exporting sector is very quiet in this debate, and then of course lots of people voice their concern about devaluation because they want to send their children abroad to study and so on and so forth. 100 million Chinese are traveling abroad. They like to see RMB stronger, so that they can save some money. But perhaps their voice is larger, bigger, but I don't know how important is their political influence. I think this kind of thing is not very important at this stage in the debate. The main worry is in China, for certain group of people, the main worry is that huge devaluation will create huge uncertainty. And the wealth of China measured by dollar will devalue. And nobody knows what will be the consequences. People fear that because devaluation, then lots of rich people will shift their assets, RMB assets, into other countries to change into real assets in UK, in United States, or shift them into dollar assets. This is the worry. And they worry, lots of people in China worry, this kind of outflow will cause unspeakable upheavals in China. But nobody are quite sure, nobody is very sure what will be the consequence. But this is just a fear. I think this is just fear. But on the other hand, another group of people worry that if you continue to intervene, then China's foreign exchange reserves will be exhausted very soon. Then you can't hold the line. Then speculators will launch a final attack. Then China will suffer, just like some smaller countries during Asian financial crisis. Of course, this perhaps is far-fetched, but quite a few Chinese are worried about that. By the way, I read one of your articles about the motivation of RMB internationalization, right? You wrote this a few months ago, last year. I think it's very interesting.
Thank you. Emily, we should wrap it up.
Hello? Yeah, I finished.
Yeah, I think we're over time,
Hello?
so I think we should wrap it up, and this will conclude our virtual conference today on China, the Renminbi, and the IMF's SDR. Thank you all for attending, and a special thanks to our speakers, Dr. Yu Yong Ding, Dr. Warren Coates, and Mr. Randy Rogers, for your insightful thoughts and dialogue. If you would like to contact the committee regarding today's virtual conference, you will receive a follow-up email within the next 24 hours that contains our contact information, as well as a link to listen to an audio recording of today's event. So on behalf of the entire Woods committee, thank you for joining us. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.